Let me ask you something. How many games do you think release on Steam each year? I mean, it's obviously a lot, right? But how many specifically? 1,000? I mean, that's already a number nobody on Earth could ever even come close to playing. But it still feels low, and it is. In fact, it's not even close to being right. Just looking at 2024 alone, there were almost 20,000 games released on Steam. That means on average, 54 games were released on every single day of last year. And that is also about 30% more than in 2023. But why am I telling you this? Simply because the ever-increasing amount of new games leads to an ever-increasing amount of game genres. And while arguments can be made on the sometimes negative effects of these genres, in fact many arguments have been made on this, just look at how many people hate on the term Souls-like, it's still an inevitable part of gaming as a whole. We just love to categorize things, and it's also just convenient. I mean, if I told you about a new game by explaining that it's got a huge open world where all the interesting things are super spread out and about 60% of your time is spent traveling between them, while most of the rewards you get for completing areas are absolutely useless items you won't ever need, you'd think I was talking about Fallout, or Cyberpunk, or Zelda, or Assassin's Creed. But as soon as I add on Souls-like, you realize I'm talking about Elden Ring, and maybe start to question if that game was really as good as people made it out to be. But I digress. Well, one of these new genres that have come up in the past few years is that of Foddian Games. Google Trends shows the term came into existence around 2022, and while I can't tell you exactly who coined the term, I can tell you who it's based on. This is Bennett Foddy. He's an Australian game developer most known for his hit game Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, and even if you haven't heard of the guy, you have most definitely heard about this game. Released in 2017, the game became a bit of an instant classic with pretty much all of the big gaming reaction YouTubers making videos on it. And if you look at the thumbnails of these videos, the main appeal quickly becomes apparent. Rage. In Getting Over It, you're playing some dude sitting in a cauldron with your task being to climb up a mountain using a hammer. The only input you have is your mouse, which the hammer follows. Follows is the key word though, as both the character and hammer have weight to them, meaning your moves have to be careful and deliberate. In addition to that, you also have to keep in mind the different surfaces you climb on, as they also have an impact on how much grip your hammer has and how easy it is to pull yourself up them. Mess up any of your moves and you fall back down. At first that means falling a few meters and losing at most a minute of progress, but as you climb higher, the falls become more and more punishing, sometimes making you lose hours of progress. So it isn't surprising that the game can be frustrating. In fact, all along your climb, you'll get to listen to some semi-philosophical yapping by Bennett about the difficulties of overcoming frustration and stuff like that.
Most obstacles in video game worlds are fake. You can be completely confident in your ability to get through them once you have the correct method or the correct equipment or just by spending enough time.
Okay, quick cut here because I learned that he actually has a doctorate in philosophy, so yeah, I think phrasing it like that is kind of rude, but you get my point. Which brings us back to YouTubers' love for the game. Since the game is frustrating, they can rage about it, overplaying their reaction to drive engagement. And while I'm certainly not a fan of that type of content, there isn't anything inherently wrong about it. What is wrong though is what people took away from it. Getting Over It is a rage game. And this just pisses me off. Not because rage game isn't a genre, it definitely is, but because it's honestly an insult to take a Foddian game such as Getting Over It and put it into the same box as a rage game like Only Up. So that brings us to the most important part of this video. What actually is a Foddian game? In my pursuit of an answer to this question, I've come up with 3 major characteristics of a classical Foddian game. Just so we're on the same page on how I've gotten to this conclusion, let's take a quick look at the games Foddy has made in the past to see where we can find the patterns. Before Getting Over It, Foddy worked on a variety of small flash games, which he published on his website. And of these, the most famous is undoubtedly QWOP. I even remember playing it back in school during like 2010, and you likely do too. And in case you don't know the game, in QWOP you control the muscles of an Olympic sprinter using Q and W for the thighs and O and P for the calves. And while just 4 buttons sound simple, if you've played it, you know that even just walking forward a single meter is a big challenge, as the controls are just too unnatural to move with much intentionality. This game would also kind of set the precedent for his other Flash games, some of which I'll go through quickly now. In GURP, you climb up some rocks using the letters on your keyboard to target a point and then shift to pull yourself up. Playing it is kinda like Twister for your fingers. Little Master Cricket. You control a baseball bat that follows your mouse to shoot back baseballs. Quick cut here, I don't know why I said baseball, it's obviously a cricket bat. Like, the game is called Little Master Cricket, I don't know why my brain defaulted to baseball. But yeah, just wanted to clear that up. Weird physics from the character, and controlling a bat kind of feels like controlling the hammer and Getting Over It. Clop, the sequel to QWOP, but this time you control a unicorn. Pole Riders, my personal favorite of the bunch. You control a dude with a very bendy pole and have to jump over a bunch of random objects. Now, these aren't all the games he ever published on his website, but definitely the most influential, and looking at these, it's pretty easy to arrive at the first and most obvious characteristic of a Foddian game. Unique, physics-based controls. All of these games offer some sort of unconventional way of controlling the characters, be it pulling yourself using a hammer, running by controlling individual muscles, or jumping using a bendy pole. These unique twists on movement for the users are what absolutely define this genre, and also what so many other games just completely fail at. The fun of a Foddian game comes from having to adapt to the controls, trying to get used to it, and climbing up on the skill curve. And this is exactly the point that so many rage games are just missing. If you've ever played a third-person video game before, you'll know how to play it chained together. There's no challenge there, no creativity. It's just completely normal character movement. Walking, running, and jumping. To make a game like that, you can simply take the default character controller from whatever engine you're using and slap a bunch of levels together. The unique controls also lead directly to the second most important characteristic of a Foddian game. A high skill ceiling. When I first played Getting Over It, it looked like this. My movements were slow, I made a bunch of mistakes, I misjudged my abilities, and even just getting over the simplest obstacles was challenging to me. However, the controls of the game are not inherently difficult or unfair, they're just kind of weird. In that way, it's kind of like juggling. It's unnatural and takes some time to learn, but at some point you get familiar with it and can do it actively without thinking about it. Also, I've heard I can't actually juggle. And that's why nowadays, when I play the game, it looks more like this. I've become adjusted to the controls and don't really have an issue with falling anymore. In fact, I've completed the game in less than 3 minutes, while my first playthrough took me more than 10 hours. That's the high skill ceiling I'm talking about. It gives the game more depth than simply being something you go through once and then drop. In fact, the first thing that many people do after finishing Getting Over It is starting it again to see how much they have improved now that they've beaten it once. In that sense, it's kind of like Dark Souls, another game known for being frustrating but also satisfying to master. And speaking of other games, now that we've defined what differentiates a Foddian game from a rage game, let's look at some examples and try to categorize them. As mentioned before, Chained Together is definitely just a rage game. It doesn't have any real depth or a high skill ceiling. Pogo Stuck. Despite its subtitle being Rage with Your Friends, it's 100% a Foddian game with its physics-based pogo stick controls. Also most definitely my favorite Foddian game that isn't made by Foddy himself. Jump King. As much as I like the principle, it's a rage game. Trying to control where you jump is at least a little more complex than in Chained Together, but overall it's not really deep enough to put it into the Foddian category. Same also goes for Bread and Fred. While it does have some physics in its movement, overall it's not really more than a standard 2D platformer. Here's a rule of thumb. If you can walk around without issue, it's most likely just a rage game. A difficult game about climbing. Here's another rule. If it looks like Foddy and it feels like Foddy, it's most likely Foddian. Though I do gotta say that I kind of really don't like how this game controls. It was just kind of annoying to drag your mouse so much, but that's really more of personal preference, so this one is Foddian. Get to Work. One I haven't played yet, but its momentum-based movement puts it right in F tier. F for Foddian. And last but not least, Baby Steps. This is actually the new game made by Bennett Foddy and was released just a few days ago as of making this video. I've only put an hour or so into it so far, but the base mechanics are classically Foddian, with you having to control each step of your character. These are of course just a few of the more well-known games in this category, and there are literally thousands of Foddian games on Steam, even if most of them never reached the popularity that something like Getting Over It did. And one important thing I want to mention is that not all rage games are bad. For example, Bread and Fred was a game I really enjoyed, in part because having multiplayer helps games that are otherwise dull in their mechanics still be appealing. Which is why I finished Bread and Fred as well as Chained Together, but never did so with the Jump King, even though I find them all to be similarly boring from a game mechanics standpoint. And of course, this isn't an attack on any particular game, and I'm not saying nobody should ever have fun with games like Only Up. I think it's simply important to understand what makes and differentiates game genres so we can better understand what we like about certain games. And also so we can continue developing a genre instead of stagnating like the Foddian game genre kind of has been in recent years. Oh, and just to mention it, this video may or may not have been made as part of me making my own Foddian game. So if you're at all interested in my progress on it or any of the other stuff I work on, subscribe so you can check out what comes of it. And of course, thank you very much for watching.